South Africa's former President Jacob Zuma has accused his successor, Cyril Ramaphosa, of treason. This is coming just 2 months up before a crunch ANC conference where the latter is expected to seek re-election as party head. Zuma, who himself faces graft charges, was reacting to allegations earlier this year that Ramaphosa concealed a multi-million-dollar cash heist at his luxury farmhouse. The scandal erupted in June after ex-national spy boss Arthur Fraser filed a police complaint alleging that robbers broke into Ramaphosa's Palapala farm in northeastern South Africa, where they found and stole $4 million in cash.
Your president is corrupt, yet the busybodies and self-appointed anti-corruption crusaders and NGOs are dead silent. I'm assuming that what President Ramaphosa has said about the many dollars under his bed or furniture is true, that he conducts private businesses while serving as president of our country. Suffice it to say that your president has committed treason. But it's all silent, all keeping. I often wonder what the situation would have been if I was the one accused of having millions of dollars hidden under my mattress.
All right, now Arise News analyst Mxolisi Masango discusses Zuma's corruption allegation against Ramaphosa and the soiled relationship between the two leaders ahead of the ANC meeting. Glad to have you, Mxolisi. Now, let's get straight into it. We all know that President Cyril Ramaphosa has just spent the past few months trying to fight his way through the Palapala Farmgate scandal. And we also know that he spent a good part of this year reaffirming the step-aside policy. Now, how likely is it that facing the unconstitutional of running a private business, according to President Jacob Zuma, that President Ramaphosa might step aside before NASREC 2022?
Look, it's going to be interesting to see how the build-up of this particular conference is going to be, because I have sat through that entire speech that Zuma gave, and, he kept going back to some of the issues that we're seeing now with the ruling party. I think some of the things that stand out for me right now is that step-aside rule itself. How do you really reaffirm or really be some sort of a custodian for the step-aside rule when you yourself have a cloud hanging over you? So those are some of the conversations that were being had. And this is actually at a time as the ANC leads up to what has been termed by one of the most bruising elective conferences in the history of the ruling party. So interestingly enough, we've seen how there has been a back and forth with the former president as well as the president. On Saturday, what was very interesting is that we had all three former sitting presidents hold back-to-back press conferences to address what they called was not being happy with the state of the ruling party at this time. So it's a very interesting time here in the country as far as the leadership of the ANC is concerned. And I can tell you right now, we also have it on record. There has been statements that have been coming from the various ANC branches to say you cannot really take to a public platform and start mudslinging at a president. So it's going to be interesting to see how dirty the build-up to this conference is going to be, seeing at a time that Ramaphosa himself is going to be trying to pushing for a second term. So those are some of the conversations that South Africans are having. But I can tell you right now, when Ramaphosa took to the podium yesterday to address the issue of state capture. He spoke at length about how he was going about the plan of ensuring that, there's recourse and people who were found to have looted state coffers face the full might of the law. It did not really seem like a speech that instilled confidence on most South Africans. And this is actually a very critical time for Ramaphosa, especially seeing that we're just under, a month to that contest, the ANC Leadership Conference that's going to be happening in Nazareth. So many conversations around that happening in the country currently, yeah?
Indeed. Now, of course, as you obviously know, the President Cyril Ramaphosa has also said that he'll implement sweeping reforms in response to recommendations by a judicial panel that probed corruption during his predecessor's term. I'm just wondering how the outcome of this investigation could affect any plans he has for that implementation.
Interestingly, as you ask this question, former President Thabo Mbeki also had a media press briefing this past Saturday where he tackled this particular matter of state capture, saying that it doesn't matter. You can establish 100 commissions of inquiry, but what is really telling is how you deal with the findings of the particular commissions. And this was just about under 24 hours before Ramaphosa had that press briefing to touch base and address the nation on how he was going to be moving rather with addressing this issue of state capture right now. So there were some, fears around if Ramaphosa would be able to be a person that really cracks the whip on corruption in the country. And I know that you spoke about, the leadership contest as we build up to this conference. There had been fears of how you're going to be having a divided African National Congress going to conference come December. And this is at a time when South Africans are grappling with just normal bread and butter matters. And if these people at the top are not in a position to address some issues that are affecting South Africans on the ground right now and basically fighting for leadership, fighting for top positions, it doesn't really look like there's going to be a proper end in sight for some of the problems that South Africans face.
Now, I'd like to quote Minister of Transport Fikile Mbalula, who said, "We are indebted to the leadership of President Nelson Mandela, who never publicly rebuked ANC presidents that followed him, but used internal processes." Now, of course, when we look at the history of, a post-democratic South Africa and how ANC has built a culture of getting rid of presidents, there's never been a smooth transition from one president to the next. Now, do you think South Africans are convinced that this fight is about corruption, or do you think that this is really a battle for the ANC? How are South Africans feeling?
Look, I wouldn't essentially say there's never been a smooth transition from one leader to the next. I mean, we've seen with the likes of Utata Nelson Mandela, there was somewhat of a smooth transition towards Thabo Mbeki, and we've seen the other presidents as well. So the problem came in with Jacob Zuma and the way that, he had to hastily leave office. And this was at the back of a time when opposition parties were calling for his head, essentially saying that you cannot really have a corrupt president that is at the helm of government. So I would not necessarily say that the ANC is not capable of bringing about a smooth transition, but it also depends on who at the time is the people's favorite, or rather the branch's favorite. Right now, we can see how the likes of Dr. Zweli Mkhize, who's that disgraced former Minister of Health, who's also trying to, throw his hat in the ring to say that he would like to be the next leader of the ANC. And I can tell you right now, if this game of the leadership, or rather as we build up to the conference, is not getting dirty, it's certainly going to be dirtier moments before that conference as it happened, as we've seen most of these fights playing out in full view of the media. We heard how President Jacob Zuma even went as far as saying that if it were him who was found to be on the wrong side of the law, and of course making reference to President Cyril Ramaphosa and how millions of dollars was found under his mattress in his home, he said that if it were me as Zuma, my people would have called for me to step down already, but no one is saying anything right now. So all this mudslinging, and you have the likes of Mbalula as well coming out to say that these meetings are conversations that must be had had behind closed doors. Most analysts have even come out to say it's Mbalula just singing for his supper, of course, trying to be loyal to his master, who is, of course, essentially the head of state. So those are analysts who are saying all of that. And this is at a very interesting time to see how loyalty in the ANC is going to play out, especially moments before that conference that is going to be happening in December.
Now, how close is South Africa, in terms of the Financial Action Task Force that has threatened the country, in terms of adding the country to the list of countries that face increased monitoring if the government fails to implement the measures that we spoke about earlier?
Look, the country's economy is already in a dire state. You already have more and more South Africans living hand in mouth, day in, day out. So it would seem like the ANC really needs to tighten the belt as far as, ensuring that South Africans are catered for, because this is also at a time where South Africans also come, from a global pandemic, COVID-19, which is not entirely gone, but still remains with most South Africans. So it would be telling for the government to really see how they plan on strengthening their economic policies to ensure that they cater for South Africans. I mean, South Africans, as I've already mentioned, are already living hand in mouth day to day. So as soon as the leadership decides to steer away from all the mudslinging, all the public slandering that we've seen, which is somewhat necessary, especially when you see a build-up to an elective conference, a highly contested elective conference, it would really be interesting to see how they plan on navigating around the day-to-day issues of ordinary South Africans on the ground.
Now, I'm glad we continue to refer back to that conference that will be taking place in December. And, it seems pretty obvious now that President Jacob Zuma will, in one form or another, be making his return to politics, whether it's through backing a faction or whatever it may be. You've already mentioned Mxolisi, Lindiwe Sisulu's name also in the hat. Who do you believe are the true frontrunners? And do you think the outcome of this conference is going to restore much needed confidence in the ANC? As you said, South Africans are going through a really hard time right now. What they need is some form of confidence visually from the ruling party. So who do you think are the front runners, and who do you think might touch South African people's hearts?
Geesh, that's a bit of a difficult one, especially when you look at the composition of the various slates. We've seen the various provinces also trying to, tighten up things and, put the knots and bolts around their campaigns, especially when they build up to this particular conference. Also, I think for me, poignant this past Saturday was listening to Jacob Zuma when he was asked about, his chairpersonship, that he's running for chairperson of the ANC. He was asked, Mr. Zuma, but you were excused from prison because, you felt you were sick, you felt you were not in a state to serve your entire jail period, of which he responded and said, what about my health? Which I really found was quite bizarre. If you have leaders at the moment who cannot be held accountable for anything, then that really is a problem. So as you've also mentioned, the various slate compositions are telling, especially when you look at the various factions and when you look at who is supporting who at which province. So as soon as, the final names are put into the ring, we'll be able to get a clearer picture as to who's likely to win what position. And I can tell you right now, it's not going to get any cleaner. It gets dirtier as we build up to that all-important conference in December. And we've also heard some of the statements that were coming from the various provinces to say that the ANC is really trying to put up a united front. Can they really fool us? Remains to be seen, because we're not really fooled when you have, one voice on the other end, another voice on the other end, especially with the build-up to such an important conference. So we're going to be looking closely at those various leadership slates in terms of who's the favorite and who's going to be coming out tops. But obviously, we're going to be looking out for the position of presidency, who is likely to take that. That's the one that we're going to be keeping a very close eye on, because that's the all important one.
Very well said. Mxolisi Masango, Arise News analyst. Thank you so much for joining us on Newsday. We appreciate your time as always.